Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Citrus Bites from our offices in Sevenoaks. As always, I'm going to take a bit of time today to look at a few bits of economic data from the last few weeks, and then I'm going to answer some questions today that have been submitted by clients, and they're going to be asked to me by our Citrus marketing manager, Simon Cockfield. So something a little bit different today and a chance to answer some of these questions that have been coming in. So I thought I'd start today in China because I haven't mentioned China for a while, probably going back to actually about Q1 and what's been going on. So for those of you watching Citrus Bites regularly, you'll remember the great news for China was the reopening post-COVID, which typically happens quite some time after the reopening in a number of other countries. It was viewed that that would create some great economic stimulus, China being the second largest economy in the world behind the USA. Actually, that hasn't really happened. In fact, I think this week it was labelled as rather tepid, the economic activity in China. So the government in China has committed to really try and stimulate economic activity over the coming months. So it will be interesting to see now what the actions are that sit behind those words and what impact that has on the rest of the world as well. Over now to the USA. So USA, Federal Reserve meeting this week, rates up again by 25 basis points. To be fair, it was felt that that was really no news at all. It was widely anticipated. It had been signposted that 25 basis points was going to be the increase. But why are they still increasing there? Well, typically the USA still has quite strong inflation. And again, going back earlier in the year, I talked about the interest rate impact on companies that are listed within the NASDAQ market in the USA. So NASDAQ is one of the equity markets. It's typically full of those companies that are very technology focused. So why was the concern then that interest rates would cause NASDAQ companies, listed companies, a challenge? Well, that's because technologies companies are valued basically for perfection of very rapid growth. So they can often have higher borrowing, but the forecast is they're going to grow really rapidly. And clearly an interest rate increase that dampens potentially demand could have a real negative impact on the forecast they have for growth. Interestingly, when you look at it now year to date for the NASDAQ as a market is up 37%. So in spite of all the negative rhetoric that was going on earlier in the year, the positive is that company performance is still really strong for most of the companies within the NASDAQ. So really interesting to see how that has played out. And then over to Europe. So the ECB, again, they increased rates as well this week by 25 basis points. Again, it had been widely signposted. Why? Well, the same challenge, even though inflation rates are in many Euro countries lower than in the UK, there's still a real concern about kind of making sure that that inflation rate is continuing to come down from where it has been. So now obviously onto the UK, spend a bit of time on the UK. What's been going on in the UK? Well, since the last Citrus Bites, we've got updated inflation data. So some good news finally on the inflation data. So inflation data came down in the UK. Inflation came down from 8.7 to 7.9%. Really important, and I always say this doesn't mean anything's coming down. What it means is that prices are increasing less quickly than they were in the previous month's inflation data came out. So the good news is that that inflation data is coming down, which is important. The other point is, and I always talk about core inflation. So core inflation, the great news is that one also came down. So a reminder, core inflation excludes things like food prices, and energy prices, and they can be really volatile. So when you look at core inflation, that's sort of what I term as the sticky inflation. So it's great to see core inflation come down from 7.1% to 6.9%. Again, it doesn't mean prices are coming down. It just means that prices are going up less quickly. But what's really encouraging is, people have been waiting for this inflation data to come for months and months and months in terms of a downward direction. So it was really, really pleasing to see that inflation data had come down. Why did the sort of non-core, if you like, inflation come down so much? Because that's the figure that really stands out. I think a Reuters poll of experts was forecasted that was going to come in at 8.2%. It actually came in at 7.9%. Why? It's basically motor energy prices that are really forcing that down. So if you look at typically things like, we know that electric prices have been coming down, but actually things like fuel. So anybody that has to put fuel in a tank in their car, actually that price has been coming down. So that's made price at the pumps has made a really big difference. So some really positive news over the inflation data. So that feels like a perfect time to pause for this month's economic update. And now I'm going to pass over to Simon Cockfield. I'm delighted that Simon can join us. He's our marketing manager at Citrus Financial, and he's going to be asking me some of the questions that you have been sending in over the last few weeks that you'd like answered. And I will do my very best to answer them as well as I possibly can. So Simon, welcome. Great. Thank you so much for joining us today with the questions.
Hello, Richard. Thank you for having me on today. So yes, as you mentioned, we've had some questions in from clients at Citrus. So I'm just going to dive straight in. So a little bit of a tricky one to start with. The first one is, do you think the Bank of England will raise interest rates again in August?
Great. A topical one, of course, there's a lot of focus on interest rates. Honest answer, so the next meeting is due in August. Yes, I would think so. So although core inflation came down, remember it's come down off of a 30-year high last month. So I guess, the job is not done. And if you think about Rishi Sunak, and whilst, it's the Bank of England that clearly drive this monetary policy, he made a commitment to halve inflation this year. So I think there is such a thing as an election coming next year. So I'm sure he's quite keen to see that number come down. So I think the Bank of England have also been really honest over their position when it comes to inflation, which is they are going to crack this inflation number. So although it was great to see it coming down, I would suggest we're still going to see some interest rate pain coming in the next few months in order to continue to see that inflation number fall.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The next question is one that we've heard from a lot of clients, actually, and it's more of a positioning type of question. So it's, interest rates were almost 14% in the early 1990s. So why is 5% in 2023 such a big deal?
Yeah, again, great question. And actually, there's probably some viewers who are going, 14%? It feels a long time away, doesn't it, for those that experience those kind of rates? And I think some of the mortgage rates went even higher at the time. For me, there's a couple of things that are making this feel different. The first one is we've come off the back of 13 years of sub 1% Bank of England base rates. So we were lower for such a long time that for a number of borrowers, they'd have never experienced, rates anything like what we're seeing at the moment. And then, of course, the increase, if you think we were still less than 1% going into 2022, and you look at where we are now at 5%, the pace of the interest rate increase has been, I think, what's caught so many people by surprise, particularly then when you add on the fact that we don't think we're done yet. So I think that's one thing. It's the pace at which it's happened. The other point, of course, is that how people feel about those interest rate increases and how it impacts them will create a lot of this feeling. So I think let's not deny that people are absolutely, so many people are feeling the squeeze at the moment. Why? Well, although wages have gone up, for example, potentially since I think the late 1990s, wages are up by sort of 200%. Actually, average house prices are up by over 400%. So for people wanting to get on the housing ladder, house prices are so much more expensive, which again will be making mortgages feel really, really uncomfortable. Perhaps the only thing that saved us from even more negative rhetoric right now, and this is not playing down that so many people are feeling the pain of these increases at the moment, is the fact that more people are on a longer term fixed rate for their mortgage than that has been the case in years gone by. And therefore that immediate impact of the interest rate increases is actually being spread out over a longer period of time. But make no mistakes, that is going to kick in increasingly over the coming months. So I think that would be my initial view. It's because we have come off the back of such a long period of lower interest rates, and the pace at which the rates have gone up, Simon, has been so significant over the last 12 months.
Okay, thank you. So obviously we've talked about the fact that we think interest rates will continue to rise. One of the questions, or we have a series of questions from clients, is about when do they start to fall? So the next question for you is, do you see interest rates falling if we have a recession?
Dreaded R word. It depends. I hate to say it depends, but I'm going to start with it depends. And I would suggest it depends largely on the severity of any recession, if indeed there is one. So, I would have thought for policymakers in the Bank of England, the last thing they want to do is kind of slam the anchors on economic growth with such significant interest rate rises, to then try and, take the benefit of all those rises from their perspective on inflation away and suddenly start to see inflation go up. So I think if we do see any movement in interest rates, it will very much depend on how severe the economic shock is of any recession. It is quite possible that if any recession is very, very mild, there won't be a pressure to see some kind of significant downward curve on interest rates. And I think if you look at average interest rates from the UK and look at the forecast for them now, I'd hate viewers of this to be walking away thinking there's a chance they're going to go back to 1%. I think anything like that is a really, really, really slim chance. So even if there is a slight decline in interest rates as a result of a potential recession, I would have thought it would be fairly muted in terms of, how significant those rate reductions are.
Okay, thank you. Closely related to interest rates at the moment, we're on to property prices.
Okay.
So do you think with this current series of rises in interest rate that there will be a marked decline in property prices, but specifically in the southeast of the country?
Property prices. Property prices have seen, I think I mentioned earlier, property prices have seen phenomenal growth over the last 25 years. I think, in the southeast, detached property prices are up by something like 450% over the last 25 years. There's a supply and demand thing going on. And actually, I don't see a massive change to that. There is still an awful lot of demand when it comes to home buying, people wanting to own their own homes. House prices fluctuate. Could we see a potential slight drop? Maybe. We've still got big demand. And actually, we've still got a situation where rates are, kind of on average. There's, as you said, there might be some reduction if we do start to go into a recession, but typically, they're not at the level seen when you go back to kind of the late 70s or the early 90s. So my view is there is still demand in the southeast. There's still a lot of economic activity in the southeast. I still think, from a house price perspective, and in fact, I go back to when we had Matthew Cumber on this show, which I think was last month from Countrywide Surveyors, we're still seeing some very positive house price performance.
Okay, thank you very much. On to inflation. So you mentioned earlier that we've had some good news when it comes to the rate of inflation. Do you see it continuing to fall? And maybe we can also throw in a second question here, which is, what are the factors that may stop it from continuing to fall?
Okay. Do I think it will continue to fall? Yes. I think the Bank of England will make sure from their perspective it continues to fall. They've been really clear on that. So I think, they will use every tool they've got to make sure that inflation continues to fall. What are the risks to it? I think there's a couple of real challenges around with core inflation at the moment, this sticky inflation. The first of all is the job market still remains really competitive. We're still seeing really low levels of unemployment. What does that mean? Well, it means for firms who are looking to hire and retain people, the cost of doing that is typically where it's felt. So they tend to fight the battle from a wage perspective. Now, clearly, and I think this has been voiced as a concern by the Bank of England, wage increases do not help the inflation story. So wage increases in order to attract and retain great talent are fueling some of this really sticky inflation. So all of the time that we are seeing this employment challenge go on for firms and firms still wanting to hire, we do have a risk that that's going to happen. And I think, jobs is one. The other is, at what point does I think on a non-core inflation, we are still going to see volatility, Simon. Volatility in energy prices, volatility in food prices. There are so many factors that influence that, outside of just standard supply and demand. We've got political factors going on as well. So I think we could still see some volatility in non-core inflation. And I think the economic in terms of core inflation, the wages point is one of the biggest risks that we have.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. I've got one more question for you, and actually it's the question that Matthew posed in last month's Citrus Bites. So this is the question that we ask every guest to set for the next person who's going to be a guest. But as we've turned the tables this month and we're questioning you, I'm going to ask you that question. So Matthew's question was, what one piece of technology would you be looking to introduce into your business over the next 12 months?
Right. So we're talking about lots of technology actually at Citrus, because what every company should be, there's so much great tech around that can help with great client experiences. So there's lots of things we're looking at. Bizarrely, I think in the immediacy, there's one thing at Citrus we really need that would make a difference. We need a new kettle, Simon. It's got a dribble issue. It doesn't matter what you try and do, but the kettle dribbles and it always leaves a pool of water behind it. So for Citrus, that's the one thing we're going to be investing in over the coming weeks, a new kettle.
I'm going to hold you to that. I'm looking forward to that new technology, that vital piece of new technology. Yeah, right. Brilliant. We'll get the catalogue out, get that sorted. Excellent answer.
Good. Any other questions, Simon?
We're all done on the questions from clients. I think that's covered. But I mean, just to remind people that if there is a question they'd like you to answer or anything they'd like us to cover in Citrus Bites, obviously just drop us a line and we'll ask those questions.
Absolutely. And I guess, Simon, because you are the guest this month, you get to put the question for next month's guest. So is there a question you would like to ask next month's guest?
Yes, like typically I do have a question prepared. It's a bit unfair because it's a question I would definitely not want to answer. But I would like to ask next month's guest, if they were starting out in their career now, what is the one piece of advice they would give themselves?
Excellent. I will look forward to asking our guests next month that very question. So stay tuned. We'll see what their answer is. Simon, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for the questions. And thank you to everyone that's submitting questions as well. It's great to be able to answer them. It's great to be able to use this forum to be able to do that. So as Simon said earlier, please do keep them coming in. That's it for this month's edition. Thank you so much for watching. And I look forward to next month's Citrus Bites. In the meantime, take care and thanks for watching.